All right, we're live. Welcome to Dive into World Building. I'm Juliet Wade, and today I'm wearing cute earrings that my husband made for me. so yes, and in fact, today's topic is dancing. And if I were to go dancing, my earrings would whack me in the face, but it could be fun anyway. And on that note, yeah. So I wanted to talk about dance in world building, and we can definitely talk about different types of dancing, which I think we should. But I'm also thinking that we should talk about like how to incorporate things like dancing into a fictional world or a story, because just knowing about how people dance in this world doesn't necessarily make it relevant to a story in the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, you always have the kind of, at the ball scene. I guess that's a sort of the most quintessential world building application of dance that I've seen is the, the classic Beauty and the Beast ballroom scene, or there is a ball scene in Cinderella, and there's a ball scene in a lot of fairy tales. Because, I don't know, balls are public events and they're high stakes and social scheme of things. So, yeah. But there's more to it than that, right? Where do people dance in genre fiction? Let's think about that for a minute. Thoughts?
The book I talk about constantly. I know all the time I'm going to call it again because no one will read it and discuss it with me. Aria of the Sea by Dia Calhoun is an entire book about ballet, except not really, but it centers around a ballet school, and the main character is an aspiring ballet dancer.
Well, there are quite a few stories that are specifically out there that are about dance schools in the real world, right?
Yeah, but this one's a fantasy.
Right. Fewer of them cross that border, I guess.
Yeah, this one's actually full-on secondary world fantasy, and it's probably some of the best world building you'll read. It's middle grade. Go read it. It's not that long.
Yeah.
Go read it.
Weddings. People dance at weddings.
Yes, people do dance at weddings.
There's actually an entire short story in Asimov somewhere, and I can't find it right now, about the first attempts to clone children who have perfect turnout so that they don't have the constant injuries that they have for ballet.
Oh, wow.
And the story is told from the point of view of the police dog, which is also intellectually augmented to protect one of the aging ballerinas, or aging, she's like 23, ballerinas who is one of the last genetic, like, non-clones.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's really cool. Birdies!
So one of my favorite dance-related stories is The Funeral March of the Marionettes.
I thought you might talk about that one.
Adam Troy Castro, the first of a series of several stories and at least one novel in that universe or on that planet. Adam Troy, by the way, is the first name. It's hyphenated. The last name is Castro. It's a novella that first appeared in 1997 in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction. And basically, they're these aliens called the marionettes or the spiders, and they're sort of spherical with long legs. And they have a dance every, I think, year on their planet, participated by 100,000 of volunteers of their species, and they literally dance themselves to death. It's the big art extravaganza of the planet, but it's got a body count, obviously.
Yeah.
And the story opens up where the human ambassador to the planet and his friend, who is an ambassador from a reptilian species, are there just watching the dance as ambassadors would do, you know, to watch and be ambassadorial about it. when they spot a human dancing in the middle of all of these aliens.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, what? how did she get here? Why did she get there? Doesn't she know she's going to die? Right? And so that kicks off the whole story. And it's a great story. It got a Nebula nomination and it kicked off a series about the marionettes. And it's all about this completely alien culture of dance.
Yeah, that's cool. Does it talk about the details of the dancing?
To some extent, yeah. I mean, it doesn't really discuss the choreography, but it implies the choreography for two reasons. One is that the physiology of the aliens is described. And the human who is in the dance has had to have physical modifications so that she can participate. And those modifications are described. So the reader can infer the kind of movements required by the dancers based on that.
Well, so it's interesting because it seems to me that if you're going to depict dancing, it's a lot like an action scene, right? Like a fight scene where if you really tried to get down and describe everything that happened, you would lose track of why you were doing this. So I think that depicting it, I think that there's sort of an inherent problem and potential problem in depicting it. If you have too much detail, you have to sort of think about what the purpose of the dancing is and why the people are dancing and what develops as they're dancing and that sort of thing, rather than trying to go deep into the choreography and attempting to describe it. I mean, I think generally speaking, that kind of stuff is important. You can't, if you really want people to focus hard on an action piece, be it a dance piece or another type of piece, you have to indicate what's happening. But it can't, if it goes on too long or if it's not balanced with some of the reasons why the people are doing what they're doing, then it tends to get very, I don't know, your brain will kind of come off of it. It will become a sort of a physical description of stuff. This is also a problem with sex scenes, right? Anytime you've got physical action going on, why do you want the details there? Why are they important, right? Yeah.
I can see that there's an inherent problem with that, though, because dance is a language. It has meaning. It conveys meaning. And so it's sort of inherent in dance itself that it is communicating something. So unfortunately, the language of dance is not common to a huge number of people. So how you do that is a really sort of a prop question.
Well, there's so many reasons for dancing. I mean, there's performance, like ballet. There's, I don't know what you would call it, just the things that you do for fun.
Yeah.
Dancing at concerts or dancing at weddings or dancing at parties.
Social dancing.
Can I systematize this?
Sure. I think Morgan, did you have a couple more items on your list?
I keep thinking of the dance, different kinds of dance. The father-daughter dance, or the first dance at a wedding, is not nearly the same thing as dancing the hora at a wedding, at a Jewish wedding. That's not something I think that happens at everybody else's weddings.
Right. It's very cultural, for sure.
Yeah. And then there are ritual dances.
Yeah. So Kat, why don't you take a turn?
So there's dance that people are doing for themselves. There's dance that people are doing with a specific other partner. There are dances done as cementing community. And then there are dances done as performance. Right? I think that those sort of are larger categories that cover everything that happens. So then there's this entire category we were talking about dance as community, where dances for weddings, dances for funerals, dances of mass courtship as opposed to one-on-one courtship.
Okay. You mean like?
So
like
I think in a world building sense, though, what's really important is not the actual choreography of that thing as much as what it's conveying and what it means, right? Because it's kind of like the fact that we don't always talk about how many millimeters an eyebrow was raised. We say that they look skeptical, or maybe they raised an eyebrow and everybody's meant to intuit that that meant skepticism, but we don't micro choreograph the facial features of our characters as they're emoting. So if we're talking about dance as a language, I think that we're talking about what's being conveyed and not the motions they're making.
That's true.
Well, it depends what you want. I mean, you can describe the choreography of a dance that is either one you made up or one that's probably unfamiliar to the readers, and then also say what it means, right? Like a fan dance, right? If the dancer is doing certain things with a fan, you wouldn't expect the reader to have a clue as to what they mean. But it might be interesting to describe that's what the dancer is doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of like No as theater. Like all those movements have specific meanings and they're telling that story, and that's how it's told is via the dance. And so you kind of have to go there.
Yeah.
I think what I note is there's a difference between a dance that the reader is familiar with and they know what all those meanings are, and a dance where the meanings are culturally embedded and the reader does not know what those meanings are.
Yeah.
And there's a danger of exoticizing them and particularizing them in weird ways, because I don't know that, for instance, if you're describing hula, it's as important to know what specific gestures were enacted so that the reader can recreate that choreography in their heads as it is what the performer is feeling and doing, what the performer's culturally embedded recipients and audience are receiving and feeling, and what any outsiders who are witnessing that are receiving and feeling, as opposed to they actually took their hands and made this motion, which is very difficult to convey in English because we don't have a language that conveys that.
Yeah, we don't.
And I think there's a danger of exoticizing when we get over particular with the gestures, because it's that distancing and saying, oh, well, the reader doesn't know what this is. And so if that's exactly what you're trying to convey, that distance and exoticization, then that's one thing, but otherwise you end up doing it inadvertently.
I think you make a good point that describing the motions specifically can be exoticizing, or particularly that it can create a sense of distance, like that you're observing something from afar and that you're not expected to understand it.
On the other hand, if you don't describe things at all, it could be just too cerebral.
Well, I mean, it is a balance, right?
Yeah, I mean, just because there's a pitfall of exoticizing doesn't mean you're automatically going to exoticize just because you describe what the move is.
Right. I mean, but I think also depends. I think, sorry, ironing out my brain. The idea of exoticizing something is partly about how we might describe something differently if it came from a familiar cultural tradition versus an unfamiliar cultural tradition. So as we're considering the balance of meanings conveyed and motions described, etc., we want to make sure that we're not that we're acknowledging similarities between our traditions and other people's traditions, and not sort of exaggerating the otherness.
Yeah, there's also a moment of didaction too, of how do people who don't have any familiarity with this learn it if you don't describe it? Like, I gotta tell you, where I learned what the Seder stuff meant was from My Name is Asher Lev, and that now is not something that's exotic to me. It's something that I get. So I think there are ways to describe, and exoticizing is kind of in the mind of the reader. If you make it something that is everyday to your character, then it's not something that's going to necessarily be seen as something that is exotic to the reader. It's the culture that your story is in.
Something that dance has, along with music, that dance usually goes with, is tempo, which you can describe the tempo. You can describe not the details of the movements, but some dances involve just the legs or the arms. Some involve finer motions, the feet or the hands or even the fingers.
Or the
head
eyes.
motions, the eyes, facial expressions that might go with the dance. You've got, even if you're just using the one human body, you've got the head, 4 limbs, which are jointed many ways, and then you have fingers, and then probably not toes, because those are less, it's harder to make distinctive motions with those, but there's a variety of there's a range of fineness of motion. So to say, okay, nodding their heads in tempo with what they're doing with their feet is very different from specifying, tapping or shaking your head side to side, or
well, yeah. So sometimes, it's good to sort of look at parameters. You were going to say something, Kat?
Yeah, so I'm thinking about the various examples of dance used in genre and out of genre, and I'm thinking of Lois Bujold's mirror dance, where the dance is very much part of the ongoing narrative thread of her entire novel there, and what she describes and doesn't describe, because in that it was important, and this is an old story, so this is slightly spoilery, but
That's all right.
discussing the fact that it was a particular social class doing this dance and the motions that were in the dance, but she describes the larger shape of the dance and what was important, and the fact that we have one character teaching the other character how to do this dance because it's a dance of mirroring. I also found that passage really interesting because it's actually, if you look at The Sound of Music, there's a scene where Maria is learning how to dance a specific Austrian dance, and it is the same kind of thing. It's a dance of mirroring, which is easy. But there are also the ways that dance is used in other media. I'm thinking of, like, in Little Women, there's a ball that's very, very important, and none of the choreography is revealed, because what's important is the things that were happening socially around the dance, and who was being asked and who wasn't being asked, and who was tired, and slippers wearing out, and all these other details that weren't about the choreography. And then you have stories like Jeannie Robinson, Stardance, where the actual choreography is the heart of the story. So I think it's
Can you write down the name of that, or tell me again? Can somebody write down the name of that story?
Jeannie Robinson doing Stardance, Spider Robinson's wife.
Oh, okay.
She's talking about dancing in space in 0G. And so at that point, the choreography does become a central part of the story. And to have the reader envisioning this. And from a world building perspective, it really is about what's the important part you're conveying. And sometimes it literally is, oh, we have this species that has a completely different physiology, and this is how they dance.
Things that are important, you reminded me when you said Little Women. Partner dances and the degree of physical contact between the partners can be important. The clothing, because sometimes your everyday clothing is not what you wear to dance in. whether it's a performance type of dance like ballet or a special social dance,
Or competitive.
ball gown. And then the clothing that you wear when you go to learn a dance, like ballroom dancing, you're probably not going to wear your ball gown to learn to waltz.
Yeah.
And then I also just sort of randomly thought of the description of kids learning to dance by standing on daddy's feet or mommy's feet, which just tells you right there, just that little, by standing on their feet, they're learning a partner dance that involves physical contact.
And just a note, that story I was talking about earlier about ballet, it's called Dancing on Air, and it's by Nancy Kress.
There is a place where children can be learning to dance by standing on their parents' feet that is not partner dance, which is where the children are learning the steps of an intricate dance by facing the same way as the parent.
Oh, yeah.
And that's not a partner dance move.
That sounds...
But...
I don't have the balance for that.
Yeah, there's also the... if you're talking about teaching dance, the structure of the place in which the people are learning to dance is different culturally. When I was learning Tai Chi, it was very difficult because I'd come from a tradition of learning how to do things by mirroring, which is a very Western dance tradition. And there are other dance traditions where you learn by being behind the performer, with the instructor, or next to the performer or instructor. And dances that you learn because you just watch them as a child from the sidelines.
Yeah.
And I kind of suddenly want to write a story about somebody learning ballet from having never watched a performance, because it's a very different experience from having grown up watching that language or attending classes even as a child that don't actually have to do with ballet, where if you learn modern dance in the US or jazz dance in the US, you often learn about the ballet roots of certain motions. And you don't learn to do the ballet motions, but you also receive the vocabulary at the same time, in the same way that, if you're learning a European language with Latin or German roots, you acquire all the other history where you wouldn't if you came from a different language.
I think actually that you make it's really good to point out the fact that we have a lot of specialized language that we use around dancing.
So if I could interject a little bit, sort of grooving off that. If you want to write a historical Western piece, like a Renaissance story or a Regency story, we have dance manuals, that use language to describe the dances. And that, that could be one way to give the reader a flavor, even if you don't entirely explain what everything means.
Yeah.
Right? You can still use that language and it gives it a flavor. Roger Zelazny in the Amber books used the French language of fencing, how a fencer would describe swordplay, to describe swordplay. And it worked very well, I think, because it gave a lot about the character and how the character who was narrating had been trained. And so there are languages. And then for non-Western traditions, there are descriptions by anthropologists, which of course has the baggage of colonialism and post-colonialism. But at least if you want to describe a non-Western dance, you can look at those and be informed as to how the anthropologists who studied those societies describe them.
Right, it's an outsider viewpoint, obviously.
Obviously, but it's something, as part of your research, you might want to be aware of anyway.
Yeah.
Right? Because you want to obviously write your story understanding the context of the history of anthropology and colonialism and post-colonialism that might intersect with the story you're trying to tell. So, there's that. And then there are some, as Kat pointed out, some dances that, are not permitted for outsiders. Like I had an ethnomusicology professor who was an expert in candomblé. And he was from Brazil, but he was not of that religious tradition and cultural tradition. And so he was never initiated, and there were limits to what he was allowed to witness. And then of what he was allowed to witness, there were limits as to what he was allowed to describe. And so, if you're using a made-up culture, obviously go for broke. But if you're using a real culture, you have to figure out what you're willing to describe and not describe. And I thought one of the it wasn't dance, but one of the great stories about that was, Samuel R. Delaney's Time Considered as a Helix of Semi-Precious Stones, where there are singers with a capital S, and you're not supposed to describe what they do. And so when one of them starts singing with a capital S, the narrator just switches to a description of the history of singers. And then at the end of that description, he says, okay, and then they were done. This is what happened. So that was cool. And as learning dance, kind of going back a little bit, one of the really interesting ones is Argentine tango, which originated in Buenos Aires when it was a boom town. And the ratio of males to females in the city was about 100 to 1. And so the men wanting to learn tango had to learn from each other. And only when they were good enough would they dare to ask a woman to dance, because otherwise they would just get laughed at. So there were men dancing with men to learn because the ratio was such. That was a really interesting. And then I could talk more about.
Where did you find that information?
I was a tangero for a number of years until the kids were born. I studied Argentine tango for years. And I talked to various teachers, and I did some research. One of the other interesting bits of Argentine tango, which is, I give as an example of how cultures interact. So some of the women in Buenos Aires at the time that this dance was becoming a thing were prostitutes that were imported from Eastern Europe, and some of them were Jewish. And so there's a move called the molinete, which dance scholars, at least some dance scholars, believe originated as the European dance like the hora, because it's the only move that's not leader-led. It's follower, the specific grapevine foot pattern, which is characteristic of the dances and the cultures where these women came from. Yeah. That characteristic footstep is not actually led by the leader, and everything else in Argentine tango is led. So this was something they were doing on their own that they brought to the dance. And so that is an interaction of culture and history and the dance. Mm-hmm. So that kind of thing can happen all the time.
I would love to see a story where you had to learn to dance as a sort of an ambassadorial function.
Hasn't C.J. Cherry written about that in one of her?
I don't know.
Somebody has written that about having to learn to dance as the ambassador and being made to perform that because a state function required all.
That's not what I was thinking of. But good point.
Well, there's Ambassador Malari in Babylon 5. I've forgotten how to, my shoes are too tight, but it's okay because I've forgotten how to dance.
Yes.
There's also, going back to descriptions and anthropologists, it's really important to note that there are words that, Alexandra, hold on just a moment.
I was actually thinking about if the negotiation were executed by means of dance. Has anybody seen that?
Oh, I like that. I've not seen that.
I want to say yes, but I don't have a name for it or a story synopsis.
Okay.
So, but going back to the descriptions, I wanted to note that the words you use to describe motions are very laden. For instance, words like gyrate and writhe, they are really, really loaded. They are often used to describe certain sorts of dances and not others. Other words get used like sinuous and twist. And so thinking about the connotations of the words that you're using to describe gestures really affects the mood and reception of how you're describing the dance.
Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, and then in you have to understand also that, or one thing to show is different parts of the body might be highlighted more or less, you know, in different kinds of dance traditions in different cultures. Like in the West, we're used to thinking of dance steps, right? Like where you put your feet is a big deal, which it might not be in the culture you're creating or describing.
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
Yeah, there's a big thing about precision. It's not a huge problem to put your foot wrong in the electric slide at a wedding. But if you do it on stage in a ballet, both you and your partner are going to come crashing to the ground.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Sure.
But also, like arm gestures and head movements might be more important, or like that Irish dancing where like
Yeah.
there's nothing happening from the waist up; it's all from the waist down. You know, but it's like you have to keep like your head and your arms still.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we all know why, right? So that, I mean, and that's one of those things of dance comes out of the culture. And so since we're creating different cultures here, we're going to have to figure out how that dance comes out of that culture and also feeds back into it.
Half the fun of dancing the hora at a wedding, which is, of course, a joyous occasion, or supposed to be a joyous occasion, is people losing track of which direction they're going and which way their feet are crossing. It just adds to the laughter.
So,
and
right.
I would go with joyous chaos, but yes.
Yes. Yeah, that's perfect, Kate. That's much described.
The valuation of precision versus improvisation versus being in step versus this joyous chaos. They're all cultural values that get expressed through the dance and the reception of the dance.
Yep.
And also, I'm thinking of various other dances where one person will be designated to be at the end and it's spectacularly flamboyant or something.
Yeah.
Or is known for their dancing capabilities, or dances where somebody gets called into the center.
Yeah.
And reluctance and joy in doing that. And, you know, are you allowed to dance?
Yep.
And go on.
I'm thinking that it's important to recognize that the cultural aspects of a dance do not represent everything that happens in that culture. I mean, the hora and its joyful chaos are characteristic of weddings, but joyful chaos isn't something that describes Jewish culture as and Jewish culture is not monolithic, but it's not something that describes Jewish culture as a whole.
Right.
And so I think it's important to realize that the context is, as usual, important.
So another thing I did in my youth when I had better knees and didn't have kids yet, was capoeira, which is an Afro-Brazilian martial art that has roots in Angola. And that was originated by slaves in Brazil. And it was a martial art, a fighting technique disguised as quaint dancing, you know. So they could tell the masters that they were, we're just dancing. But they were concealing blades and they were learning to fight, and specifically learning to fight in a way that was effective even if you're shackled. And so that was a martial art disguised as dance, that kind of thing. Just volumes about a culture, right? You have slaves from one part of the world, and, you know, being dominated by masters from another part of the world, and they're they're learning to fight so they can if they need to.
Yeah.
Which then leads to some of the dances that are done as performances now, but Eastern European dances, which were very much about physical training for young men in sort of warrior positions and learning about swordsmanship and horsemanship skills on the ground, because the particular exercises they're doing are very, very thigh muscle intensive.
Yeah, yes. I'm thinking of that Ukrainian dance team.
Right. There's this whole
a while ago.
And so again, we're getting back into what is the role of the dance. And I think we haven't done dances of teaching, not teaching the dance, but teaching culture.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's interesting that you would say Ukrainian dance, because that's really gender segregated.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's the men who do the sort of war dances and the women who do the little tiny steps that make you look like you're floating. And that sort of thing. It's a much showier, more restricted form of dance than the men's form of dance. So again, we have culture being encoded in the dance again. And I don't know that that's necessary. And here we are at, okay, Eastern Europe is not as exotic as African dancing, which, you know, is usually described, ballet is described as floating on the air, and African dance is described as you get your energy from the ground. Everything is done to and into the ground, and then back out. So there's one of the things that would be really cool to see in a science fiction work would be different types of dance for different cultures meeting, and how that would come out. Because we have that now at, you know, like interracial marriages where half the group is doing the electric sled and the other half is going, I don't know what okay.
Those are the best weddings ever.
They really are.
So yeah, that's good. I you know, at this point, I'm just happy to see science fiction and fantasy that doesn't, you know, exoticize and play into post-colonial tropes. So if you're not doing that, you're ahead of the game already.
Well, one of the things about dance as training is that why do we not have entire squadrons of spaceships learning to dance?
What is this?
I mean, entire squadrons of spaceships learning to dance, because that's what Strat Tech is going to be. You know, I mean, Thack Weave is a thing. Sorry, THACH, Thack Weave. It's the reason that the Chicago airports are named what they are. But it's a formation that two pilots do coming at the enemy so that they have firing solutions and the enemy doesn't.
Oh, okay.
But it is a dance of sorts. One of the things that I say to my students all of the time, well, okay, the ones that fail, is that the thing that you are doing, this script of motions that you have to do in caring for a person, like getting them up out of bed or turning them around or whatever, this is all dance. Because you're doing this sequence of motions. They are always the same motions. You have to adapt them to the sequence of the patient that you're in, but these are the things that you have to do. You have to do them in the same sequence every time. You have to do them fully every time, or you have failed. So there are ways to teach things via dance that are hard to teach as like an academic thing of here, we need to check off all these boxes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There was, I remember it was a news piece after the tsunami in Japan, and this elderly woman came up with a dance about like what to do when a tsunami came, and was then teaching it to people.
Interesting. Yeah, when you see the sea disappear, these are the things that you do. Yeah, that's totally cool. I mean,
Yeah.
when I went to Africa, I had to encode a whole bunch of scientific teaching in a play in a language I didn't speak. And so it all came out as sort of a dance. Like, here are the things that we are doing. This is the things that you are looking at. These are the same things that you see in your regular day. And here are different ways of responding to it physically.
Mm.
And because there are so many languages there and not everybody speaks all of them, that worked a lot better than trying to just translate things into Swahili.
Well, so it is kind of interesting, and I'm going to sort of...
Yeah, bring us back.
We often think of gesture and physical movement as not being like speech, as being sort of more universal. But it's important not to think of it as entirely universal, because body language can be a bit confusing sometimes, and is always culturally based and is often associated with very specific types of meanings. So it's just something to keep an eye out for.
It's pretty much not universal at all.
Yeah,
Really?
much.
Sure, but you could enjoy a performance of Bharatanatyam or No or Kathak dance and be completely oblivious to the symbolism. But if you know the symbolism, then it communicates. It's like the difference between listening to a song whose lyrics are in a language you don't know that you could still enjoy as an aesthetic object, and understanding not just the lyrics but what they refer to.
Absolutely. And conversely,
a reasonable song in English, and
yeah. But conversely, in Sense8, you have basically a Western audience, and they're looking at this huge Bollywood dance number. Now, you may not know what's going on other than this is some sort of proposal, but the joy and the feeling that they have in, this is the men's version, and we are showing off our power and our strength and how much we as a society want this to happen. And the women come back with, okay, but this is what we are. And you don't have to know the culture to get what they're saying.
Yep. Okay, Che's got an interesting thing to say. Dance is also physically strenuous and can be exercised, but can also limit people who participate.
Yes.
Yep.
Also, it helps if you're not deaf or blind.
Well,
I mean,
depending on how loud
there are other disabilities that are that are limiting.
Yeah.
Wait.
Loud the bass line
Deaf people dance.
Yeah, they do dance, and they dance on the basis of different things.
Yes. So I guess it depends on whether you have
rhythm, right?
Hearing or or whatever.
Yeah, except that I don't think they're. Yeah, I don't.
There was a whole Quantum Leap episode where he helped this deaf woman become a dancer.
Cool.
But I think that
I'm just saying from lived experience, deaf people dance and enjoy dancing and do many of the dances that hearing people do. So I think we want not to.
So I think mobility is more of an issue.
Yes. Although there are some very good wheelchair and disability aid dances going on, and there are entire companies, well, only in SF that I know of, but I'm sure there are more.
No, there are actual wheelchair ballet companies, among other things.
Really?
And wheelchair hip hop.
Yes, there are.
That's cool. I had no idea.
I think assuming that physical disability precludes dancing is a dangerous place that able-bodied people end up in, because our experience of dance is so rooted in our able-bodiedness.
I would say that disability can affect it, but doesn't preclude it.
Most people who are in cultures that esteem dancing find ways to dance, whatever their situation, is what I'm comfortable saying.
That's fair. I'll say that turnout, if you're doing ballet, some people have natural more turnout than others. And if you want to be a professional, you have to have turnout, especially if you're a woman.
However, when Kat mentioned the dances that are done as a group for, say, like the Maasai, where they have the jump dances, there aren't a lot of disabled people who are going to be involved in that.
Right.
Not that that's right,
Right.
correct, but that's how that works at the moment.
Well, I think we can agree that the potential for problematic writing, if you're going to talk about,
Huge.
you know, disabilities in dance, is right up there with the potential of exoticizing, right? These are
Yeah.
pitfalls.
Yes.
And
Yep.
you have to do it carefully and, you know, without trying to avoid ableism, right? is one of the pitfalls.
So one of the things that I've seen some writers do interestingly, and I can't think of anybody as specific examples right now, is talking about the ways in which humans and non-humaniform aliens interact when they're learning each other's dances and physical gestures. Because as we said way back at the beginning of this webcast, we do assume danceability based on the way our bodies work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
which is interesting.
Kat, you missed at the very beginning. I talked about the funeral dance of the marionettes, which by Adam Troy Castro, and there's an alien species called the marionettes who have a certain body type, and a human joins their dance, and that human has to have physical modifications done to her body in order to be able to participate with them, and that's one of the not plot points, but one of the details.
Yep.
I also think that it's interesting that we have cultures where the dances are patterned very much in expectation of performers in the center, performers on the outside, performers on a stage, or everybody on a floor, and it changes the way that we move.
Yeah.
And so one of the interesting things, for instance, is describing what happens when you have a floor full of people doing polka or a floor full of people doing waltzes.
Mm-hmm.
And also, we haven't really talked about how an individual is interacting with their dance. Some people are noted when they're dancing for being extraordinarily graceful or stiff, and the ways in which, and sometimes somebody who's normally very awkward off the dance floor is just glorious on.
Mm.
And these are little character tells that are really interesting and fun to play with, I think, as a writer, for how we play to and against type in these situations.
Yeah.
Also, how comfortable somebody's partner feels, right? Like in partner dancing. So, like, you could be not a particularly graceful dancer, but but everyone wants to dance with you because of you're very good at the way you interact with your partner, right? So I've done dancing for many years, and my wife and I actually met in a dance. And so the other thing you can talk about in terms of dance expertise, like if you're doing a ballroom dance like a waltz, the outside of the ballroom is the fast track where people are zooming along. If you want to do fancy moves that block traffic, you go to the middle. So if rank beginners, and you could write a scene like this, a rank beginner will the urge will be to like, oh, let's go to the edge of the room, you know, because I'm scared and I want to be near the wall. Well, except that's the fast lane. So it becomes a big problem for rank beginners, and beginners learn pretty quickly that the fast lane is not the place to be. The center is the place to be when you're learning. But day one, you don't necessarily know that.
Well, and also I would say you could do some interesting things talking about situational awareness that dancers have to have, right? How much awareness do you have to have of what people are doing around you, and how are you supposed to interact or not interact with those people? Like, what is the negative space potential of the dance, right?
If you're a leader, and I have a lot of experience with this, in a crowded dance floor, there's some moves you just don't do, right? Because they take up too much space. Yeah. And there are smaller versions of some moves that you do. And if you have a lot of space, then you can go nuts, especially if you have a partner who can follow those things.
Mm-hmm.
If your partner can't follow those things, you still don't do those things. So, you know, that's partner dancing. The other thing about like Western partner dancing is it's extremely gendered. Right now, in the modern day, you have women leading and men following sometimes, or two men dancing or two women dancing, or people who are not binary leading or following. But there's a lot of traditional gender roles encoded into Western partner dancing that either you play against or you play into. And it's impossible to not reinforce it if you're just, doing a male lead and a female follow.
Strictly Ballroom is a really cute dance-related movie where dance is a big part of the plot. And that's actually very culturally interesting, I think. Ballroom-related and Australian-related and stuff like that. Then the one that Che is mentioning in the sidebar is Shall We Dance?
I was about to say Shall We Dance.
Which is an adorable movie.
It's really lovely.
Yeah, I saw it like ages ago. It was really good.
Yeah, it's highly recommended. See the Japanese version.
Yes.
I liked how in the beginning he talked about like seeing someone dance and like protecting their partner from falling. And that was kind of what one of the things that he was like kind of taken with.
The going back to gender, the whole idea of dance being an acceptable place to touch in cultures that are low touch. And also, I wanted to talk about quorums, and there are some dances that can only be performed with a certain number of dancers.
Yep.
And that becomes an interesting plot point if you want it to be. And then dances that require no numbers at all, that are, make the line as long as you want.
Yeah.
And did it get crowded? And what happens? And how do you manage crowding? And these are all cultural. And there's also the issues of, in Western social dance, when you're not doing formal ballroom dancing, but when you're just out at a club, how do you handle being on the floor and you're dancing and there's touch going on, there's appropriate touch, there's unwanted touch, there's dance used as a cover for other actions. And so all of these things can show up in science fiction. And I note that as I think about it, we have a lot of science fiction set in bars and not a lot of science fiction set in dance clubs.
Well, it's hard to hear in a dance club, so dialogue becomes problematic.
Well, it's hard to hear in bars, too.
I guess it depends on the bar. Yeah, you're right. Some of them are really loud. And then there's sports bars where everyone is just shouting. Periodically everyone will shout because something happened on the TV.
Yeah, that happens in my house, actually. Well, here we are, and it's 5:00. So I'm going to say this has been really interesting. Thank you, all of you, for bringing up such wonderful and interesting topics and things to think about. I really appreciate everything that you've contributed.
Thank you. This was a great talk.
So I'm excited. So let's see. This coming week is going to be a topic hangout. And I don't have a topic for it yet, but we will get one. But on the 19th, we are going to be having Rebecca Roanhorse on the show, and I'm excited about that. So that will be the 19th of June.
Cool.
Lovely.
Can I add just two other things that I just remembered because they're in another browser window?
Okay.
Very brief. Okay. The first is, and these are just examples of how you could describe story through dance. One is there's a song by Sting, They Dance Alone.
Oh, yeah.
Is based on, it's a protest song against Pinochet in Chile, and it's based on women dancing with photos of murdered loved ones or missing loved ones, people have been disappeared, right? And that is absolutely a window into a situation. The other is a light one. There's a wonderful song many, many years ago, 1982, called Attack of the Name Game by Stacy Ladisaw, which was about an alien who came down to Earth in a flying saucer in order to play the name game, and then to teach the quote spaceman dance, which included lyrics explaining how to do the dance, like you put your left foot down, now you put your other left foot down, now you put your right foot down, now you put your good foot down, and walk like this, and then it had a little beepy sounds. It was just really cute. So,
The time warp.
yeah, the time warp. Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
one of the best dances in all of science fiction.
The hokey pokey. I'm just kidding.
Dances with built-in instructions.
Yes.
Dances with built-in instructions. Yeah.
And we all know them.
Sure. And in fact, Rocky Horror also references the Madison, which was a dance that was popular.
It does.
Also,
Well, I mean, I think
also dance
And
dance is scandal, and then the scandal becomes conservative.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
the Madison was also in what movie was that? There's a whole thing on the Madison. Oh God, it's killing me.
I don't know.
Maybe we can put it in the
But-
show notes.
Yeah,
Oh,
I'll let you know
talk about-
later. I will remember, but it's really, really popular, and everybody knows it. It was done by that guy with the little handlebar mustache that does all the divine and all that stuff.
well,
John
what
Waters.
do you think of it?
Thank you,
What was
John
it?
Waters.
John Waters.
Well, John Waters is the
I
guy
don't
who
remember.
did it, but I can't remember the name of the actual musical. It's done by everybody right now. Shoot.
Hairspray?
Shampoo?
Yes, thank you.
Shampoo, yes.
Yeah.
Hairspray.
So, hairspray. Also,
Hairspray, yeah, that's it.
we didn't
Hair
talk
sample.
about, and it seems to be a fading tradition in some places, but there used to be a rock dance at a lot of science fiction conventions, and there was a certain number of fanish songs that always came up that had ritualized dances
Mm.
that I cannot remember seeing anywhere else. Not just the time warp, but people like to play Rasputin, among other things. And it's just a bunch of quirky dances that apparently were big favorites of a certain cohort of fandom.
That's cool.
Well, Regency dances were big at cons because of one guy who just kept leading them and teaching people Regency dance.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I think there's actually there's a Jane Austen convention, and they have a ball.
I bet they have a ball.
They have a
Well,
lot.
literal actual.
but Jane Austen conventions having Regency style dancing is expected. Science fiction fans having Regency dancing in California is all due to one person who really loved leading Regency dancing.
Yeah, and
It could have easily been any other dance.
we haven't even gotten into like how dance related metaphors have crept into our language, like having a ball.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think we better go. I love you all. So thank you for being here, and I'm going to stop our broadcast.